Hey y'all, welcome back to the Smoke Dungeon. DB here, and I'm coming at you with a little Seas of Thunder, Global War, 39 to 45. I did a box opening video on this. I pre-ordered it. It showed up about a month ago, and since then, I have managed one playthrough with an actual human of Scenario 1. Shout out to my man Cairo up in Rhode Island. I blessed him with a visit, and he blessed me with suffering through this monstrosity. He's one for the chit games, but I think this one was a little brain bustage for him. That's my dude, though. Another 1/16 of the Graying Legion. Love him. Good egg. But in that month's time, DB has managed to play 2 entire 25 round solo games. And then, excuse me. And then I've managed to play one solo scenario 1 by myself, and then one scenario 2 by myself, and one scenario 3 by myself. So that's roughly 5 solo plays of some variety, 2 really long ones, and then 1 quick intro opposed game. So here I am to hit you with my thoughts. Okay? The quick and ugly is this game has a lot of different levels and layers to it. Depending on if you're playing specific scenarios versus the entire campaign. Each scenario, because they span only 3 to 4 turns, you can try some nutty things to get away with it that you wouldn't necessarily do in the entire campaign game, which I feel like is cool. Strategies. But let's go to the core of the game. The core of the game is like War at Sea, old school War at Sea. You have victory point squares. First number for Axis, second number for allies. You'll see the majority of the time you use the blue numbers. Sometimes if these additional powers have entered the war, like if Italy is in, who they are in this, then you use these green numbers. If Russia is in, you use these, or I'm sorry, if the Soviets are in, you use these red numbers. Things like that nature. This is the early war side of the map right here, because this is the count victory points, and then it'll be returned to base on turn 6. So Italy has come into the war 3 turns ago in this game. This is another complete solo game that I'm playing by myself, because DB is a sad panda that loves him some chit games and loves him some Navy games. So overall, the game presents you with a lot of very interesting choices. The majority of the time, the German player is going to, or the Axis player, I'm sorry, is going to move last. So the Allied player will have to decide where to defend. Do they want to defend the victory point squares? Some sea zones are worth a lot of points, up to, I believe, the highest on the early war side of the map is 5. For the Axis, and then I think it's 2 for the Allies. Obviously, the Allies get a ton more ships in the early war. However, one thing I have noted is that when Italy enters the war in this game, in turn 4, Vichy, or France becomes Vichy at the end of that turn, and these are all in the basic rules. I feel like that turn is very important about where the United Kingdom places the majority of its units, and it has to prepare for Italy to enter the war, because in one playthrough I was just like, oh, Italy's going to put all their stuff down, and then I'll move stuff in there to compensate, and that didn't really work well. Italy came in and just smashed, because you can smash people. Right? They get all their ships, and you can be a different kind of Italy and be aggressive, where they really weren't. So that was very interesting to me. Some basic gameplay things that I thought were interesting or odd or didn't really care for. One thing that I think is very important is you guys need to check the errata, which you can find on Board Game Geek, because there are a couple typos in the various port mats. I don't know if these are all in frame, but these are where you return your units. They tell you how many guys can base at certain locations over here. There are a couple of typos on this version. The Norwegian ones, especially at this point in the scenario, the Norwegian ones are wrong. Because you have more units than what it says you can actually dock into port on your board. So that you're kind of like, what the hell? I mean, it's easily noticeable. You're just like, whatever, I'll spread them out 1, 1, and 1 extra. They're all off by 1. There's a couple typos on the units. Up until, I believe it's Nelson and Rodney should deploy at the start of the game. I forget what number is on their bases. One of them is destroyed. And oh, here's the Rodney right here. He's in the repair. He's got 3 turns in the repair dock. They say 12 on him, but there actually should be 1. The Roma's another one like that. And then there's 2 really important things that I think need to be said that are in the errata that I couldn't find in the rule book, so I don't think they are. You can't move diagonally, which is only in a few squares, but like down here in the Indian Ocean, it makes a big difference. Or up here in the top corner, there's a couple locations where I feel like, or down here in the South Atlantic is a big one, because I've had a lot of action going on down here in this game. That's a huge one, because it allows, you know what I mean? You can, here to here is 2, or it's 3. That's a big difference. And then the other thing is that land-based aircraft always return, whether you use them, whether they're hit, or whether they're saved. And that's one thing after a few playthroughs of the game, I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's like because basically, for example, right now, the last 2 turns in this sea zone right here, the North Sea, right? All these English ships are here, or Commonwealth ships. The Axis can launch an airplane from Le Havre, Amsterdam, Hamburg, Kiel, and Copenhagen. They can come with 5 land-based aircraft here a turn. Now, the British can counteract 2 with a plane from Portsmouth up the Pompey, or Scapa Flow, right? So then you're down to 3. So it forces you to basically have aircraft carriers in there to counter all those planes. And that's even before the Germans even sail. And that's every turn that they've been hitting them like that. The same thing can be done down here in Italy if you can force the British to come into a spot. And I know that's kind of historical, right? It's, but I feel like, I don't know. I feel like if those land-based aircraft get destroyed or canceled out, maybe they should get a repair roll or something. And the way repairs work in this game is that if you take damage, but you're not sunk, you're immediately moved to the repair track at the end of the combat phase that you're in, and then you roll a die. And on a 1 to 2, you go in this box, 3 to 4, this one, 5 to 6, this. And at the end of every turn, it slides down. Which is a cool system. It's not like Ward C where you have ports that the ports can actually only repair a certain amount. It's like totally different, because if you rolled really crappy and you were only doing minor damage to everybody, they literally all slide back the next turn. In Ward C terms, I guess that's like only being disabled, right? The old X that you used to get on a 5. I'm trying to think what else. The questions with Italy, what you can do with Italy is insane. One thing that I want to talk about is time management and counters, because there are like 1,500 counters for this game. Turn 11, when the Japanese come into play, this other side of the board makes this side of the board look like child's play, which is nuts. Literally, there are mountains of 1/2-inch cardboard squares everywhere. And something about that pleases me greatly to like no end. I fucking love it. But something about it is also a little overwhelming, especially because at the end of every turn, you need to return all your ships back to your port mat. And I mean, the one for the late war Axis mat, you can barely, there's no background space on it. It's insane. So that's a little much. And I feel like that could be very off-putting to people. The convoy placement is another mechanic in this game, which is basically they're like floating victory points that move around. They only move after, I say they move around, but that's because when they're removed from the board at the next turn, you place them back and you can put them in different locations, which is cool. You get to place, the Axis player places both Axis and Ally convoys, so there's strategy in where you place those, because they're, if you sink them, they're worth a point and stuff. But a lot of ships that when they attack convoys, they can't actually contest the sea zone that they're in, so you can't gain points that way. Unless there are no other enemy ships there. That's one I'm going to get into in a second, which was a little strange for me. I'm trying to think what else. There was a few other things I wanted to say. Oh, one thing I've seen online on the forums on Board Game Geek is people just going bonkers, berserk, ape shit, about some of the ship stats. And while I do agree that some of the ship stats don't really make a lot of sense to me, overall, I feel like in terms of the game itself, they play fine. The one thing, there may be Russia may be a little too strong, but I'm not ready to make a firm decision on that one yet. But there are a couple ship stats that when I saw them, I was like, what the, huh? Like the Iowa class battleships, are not as, or is equal to in firepower stats to like some old World War I era battleships and stuff sometimes. And that's kind of nutty. But when you look at the game, it's more of an overall arcing strategic instead of a tactical simulation, although there's a little bit of that involved. And I feel like it doesn't really matter that much. Almost the fact that by the time you get those Iowa class battleships, I mean, aircraft carriers rock out in the Pacific, dude. So it's like, it's not the biggest deal, Like, and if the stats are consistent within the own game, which I feel like they kind of are, they're where they need to be for the game to make sense, then that's fine with me. One of the stats the most important stat in the game, if I'm being honest, is probably movement. And, movement or that special ability that you'll see in the corner of some, like that says mine, ASW or whatever. That's probably the biggest thing. The hidden deployment in this game is awesome. You can have an idea if your memory is good. Like, oh, I know that like the Graf Spee is down in Montevideo or whatever. But once you start moving stuff around and stuff is going like, yeah, good luck, man. I mean, especially when you're playing solo and I try and remember all this shit. And then I come back to the game. I purposely will move the ships from one nation and then take a break, usually do something with the kids during the day or whatever. And then I'll sneak down again, move some other shit, then go back up. You know what I mean? So that way I don't really have a chance to remember. And I feel like that's great for me. Also, late at night when I'm doing it, I'm down in the smoke dungeon, hand in hand with that. So my memory is not always what it needs to be. So I don't really have a problem with that. And like I said, the numbers for the combat and stuff, who cares that the Yamato and the Fuso are almost the same? It doesn't really matter. At that point, you're dumping a shit ton of counters over there. And honestly, there's so many damn aircraft at that point that if that Yamato gets to shoot, like the American player's doing it wrong, right? because at the end of every phase, you're going to remove those casualties. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that was people. I saw people jumping on that right away and being like, "Oh, I'm throwing it back in the box. The stats are shit." And no, 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 no. And it's like, okay, if you want to do that, that's fine. You know, you bought the game. That's your prerogative. But that's not what the game is about. You know, I mean, it's close enough. It's not like the Yamato is the same as a goddamn destroyer. You know, so I don't know. That I just felt like I should say that. One of the other things I want to talk about real quick is the combat sheet here. So when two opposing forces meet, you each have one of these sheets. You're going to assign your units to where you want them to be, what roles you want them to play. And one of the things I would stress to people, and it's kind of tricky, I've screwed it up on a few times when I'm playing by myself here in the dungeon, is that you got to be aware of what ships you can actually place where. And the trickiest one I've found is this anti-submarine here. I forget that a lot of cruisers, mine layers, and mine sweepers and things of that nature can still be placed in the ASW box if they have the mine special ability. Which I always forget that the mine, instead of doing mine warfare with it, you can do anti-sub warfare. And that I think there was one whole playthrough where I didn't realize that, which is obviously my mistake for being a blowout, right? But I didn't realize that. And that made me think that there weren't enough destroyers in the game at certain points, or that destroyers were undervalued, because I would actively attack the destroyers knowing that there would be no more ASW. And that wasn't necessarily only with the Kriegsmarine or Italy. You know, I was doing that with the French in the beginning, or like when they became Vichy, because they have a bunch of submarines. So yeah, that part was really tricky. But I do love how the combat phase resolves as you go through, right? You're going through the steps, and guys take their attacks, and then they'll move to these boxes down here, which is, you know, I dig that. And there's ways to like try and evade combat if you're certain class, like cruisers can try and evade combat, stuff like that, which I find to be very interesting and very cool. It's because there's a strategy placement to the actual combat, right? It's not just like, oh, this is a cruiser, he's just going to throw 2 dice or whatever. I mean, that can be the case if he's like a bog standard shit World War I cruiser or whatever. But you also have other options on, perhaps you could put him in the anti-sub box, or maybe you could try to put him in the raider box if he's fast enough. You know, so there's things like that. And then there's a level where you comes to a point like, do you want to have a go at the convoy and immediately return to port? Or do you want to try and contest the sea square, but risk getting shot at by any surface ships? Like, there's a lot of like thinking and layer into that. And that comes even after your placement, right? So you have all the thinking about where you're going to place your stuff. If you're the allies, it's like, are you going to defend convoys? Are you going to defend in groups? Are you going to spread out? That was a question that like hurt me for a while. Was like, should I just be rolling with like 4 or 5 giant fucking stacks of ships in like the Atlantic and giving up all that space to the Germans since they move afterwards? Or do I spread it out and cover everything and entice them to try and come out? But I can't spread it out too thin, because then when they come out, they're just going to hammer me, right? So it's like, there's so much in there, which I love, dude, because like old school War at Sea, I loved. I grew up, one of the first games I played, I got it when I was 6, I think in 1983 or something. I want to say that's when I had it. I forget. It's been a long time, but I still have 2 copies of the game, one unpunched because I love it so much. But it's very basic, right? You're just sliding dudes into like those 7 sea zones, I think it is. You know, and there's War at Sea 2 with the expansion and all that stuff, and I love it. But this is like, just like so much more that mean, it's a lot, but I love it. And I can't wait till I get my brother down here and I have a go at him. And it's interesting because, for example, in this game right here that I'm playing, I'm dropping stuff. So this is the victory point sheet, right? And you can see that the Allies were off. By the end of the first scenario, it was 135 to the Allies to 72 to the Germans. Then the first turn, turn 4, it was 219 to 116 is what it was. Because the Allies got a bonus 37 points for the French and Norwegian ships that went Axis. Because I didn't do a lot with the Norwegians. That's another thing. You think, like, should I just kamikaze these dudes and try and, like, sink shit with them? Or do I just leave them in port and, like, almost make them awash? There's a lot of stuff like that. But then on turn 5, it goes to 250 for the Allies to 196 for the Axis. Sea zone control, 49 points. They got as many in turn 5 as they did in the first 3 rounds of the game. This go through, because I'm trying some different strategies. I'm a very aggressive Italy this game. Germany wasn't really afraid to come out. You'll see they've been contesting here. You'll notice by all the damage dudes you got over there, that I haven't been afraid to throw a fight in there. And this is only early, because I feel like an Axis strategy when you're playing the whole campaign has got to be do as much as you can early, because I think it's like turn 14. I forget now. It's turn 14. They get so much reinforcements come from the Allies. So, yeah. But overall, I'm just trying to think if there was anything else I really wanted to say. I enjoy it. I highly recommend it if you're into, like, grand strategy stuff. Again, the counters are small. Kills my eyes. Especially I'd be down here. I'd be squinting like shit trying to read some of these ships. But, yeah, I really enjoy it. I gotta say. I find it very well done. I mean, the amount of time I've spent on it already, I've got my, $50 worth or whatever it cost me. Shit, you get one whole day of punching counters. That's enough, right? So, I don't know. I'm going to continue to hammer away at it, but I just wanted to share this with you and let y'all know that I think it's a really good game. I think it's very entertaining. I think it offers something on many levels, whether it's outguessing your opponent in deployment, in the actual combat, in your overall strategy. It's got a lot to it. And then there's just, old-fashioned victory points. I'm digging it. I like it. So I would highly recommend it. Seas of Thunder, GMT Games, Global Naval Warfare, 1939 to 1945. Remember, y'all, be good to one another and do what you feel.